The afternoon had settled into the cottage in a quiet sort of way. The light rested on the floorboards in a golden glow, and the ticking of the clock sounded softer than usual, as if it too was taking its time. Roscoe was kneeling by the low bookcase, returning a few picture books to their places, when he noticed something resting just beneath the armchair. A small knitted knight lay on his side, one woolen leg bent beneath the other, as if he'd paused mid-step and simply decided to rest. His body was worked in close, careful stitches, once silver grey, but now softened to the colour of misty moonlight, with a few places rubbed smooth where paws had held him most often. A faded blue tunic was knitted over his chest, thinner at the edges and faintly bobbled with age, and a narrow belt of darker yarn was stitched snugly around his middle. His rounded helmet sat low over a stitched smile that had always curved up a little more to the right. One arm lay where it should. The other drooped slightly at the shoulder, and just there, between two tired stitches, a whisper of pale stuffing showed. Not a tear exactly, but a place that had simply given up after being brave for a long while. Roscoe lifted him carefully. "Well now," he said, "you've had a time of it." The knight's arm dangled at an odd angle. Just below the shoulder, a seam had loosened, and a puff of pale stuffing peeked out like a quiet sigh. Berry looked over from the window seat. "Oh no," he said gently. "Sir Cedric's feeling like week-old parsley." "He's not broken," Roscoe said, delicately cradling the knight in both paws. "Just asking for a little looking after." Gus the Whiskers appeared in the doorway almost at once. "I'll fetch the sewing tin," he said, already turning on his heel. They cleared the table without fuss. There were just a few things to take to the kitchen. Empty bowls they'd had their soup in, and some small plates dusted with the crumbs of crusty rolls they'd had with it. They placed a soft, folded cloth on the table. Then the knight was laid upon it, straightened and smoothed, as if settling into a comfortable bed. Caratina knelt beside him and examined the loose stitches. "The wool's worn thin here," she said. "We should give him a patch, not just pull it tight again." Millie Moonbeam nodded. "Something soft. He's done enough marching." Gus the Whiskers returned with the tin. It was very old, with a lid decorated with meadow flowers that never quite closed shut. Inside were spools of thread in faded colours, a thimble, a few buttons that no longer matched anything, and needles tucked into a felt square. Roscoe lifted the knight's arm slightly. "He'll want to keep this bend," he said, "so he can still wave." Berry smiled. "And salute." They chose a piece of woolen fabric, the colour of oat milk, warm and plain. Caratina cut it into a neat oval, turning it once in her paws before setting it down. "That'll sit nicely," she said. Millie Moonbeam held the knight steady while Roscoe threaded the needle. The thread slid through with only a little persuasion. "Ready?" Roscoe asked. The knight said nothing, of course, but Berry leaned in. "He says yes." The needle moved in and out, slow and sure. Each stitch pulled the patch snug without pinching. No one rushed. The clock ticked on. The kettle on the wood stove clicked softly as it cooled, and outside a bird practiced a tune, stopping and starting as if deciding how it should go. Raider Biscuits tied off the thread when it shortened. Floyd held the loose arm just so, making sure it stayed comfortable. "Tell us a story," Berry murmured to the night. "About when he guarded the biscuit tin," Floyd added. Roscoe smiled as he worked. His gaze drifted toward the mantelpiece for a moment, as though he were looking back through time. "I remember," he said, "when the biscuit tin lived on the low shelf by the bread basket." He smiled to himself. "That was before we realized just how curious the mice were." The knitted knight sat very still, his woolen helmet tipped slightly forward as if listening. "Every evening," Roscoe went on, "after the kitchen was tidied and the lamps were turned low, the knight would be set beside the tin, just close enough to be noticed. The mice would come, not all at once, one at a time, a curious whisker here, a snuffling nose there. They'd pause when they saw him, puzzling out their next move. The knight never moved, never stirred or rattled his armour. He simply stayed exactly where he was, night after night." The fire in the hearth gave a soft pop and crackle. "And somehow," Roscoe said, "that was enough. The mice would decide they had somewhere else to be. Off they'd go to find a crumb under the stairs perhaps, or a seed they'd already saved." He glanced back at the night. "By morning the biscuit tin was always just as we'd left it. No nibble marks, no missing custard creams." "That's the sort of guarding he was good at," he said. "The kind that works without anyone having to notice." At last the final stitch was tied off. Caratina smoothed the patch flat, pressing it gently into place. "There," she said. "That should last him a good while." Millie Moonbeam lifted the knight and settled him upright. His arm rested easily now, no stuffing showing, the patch sitting quietly where it belonged. "He looks himself again," she said. "Better," Berry chimed in. "He looks cared for." They placed Sir Cedric back next to the armchair, on his little wooden stool, where he liked to sit. From there he could see the whole room, the cosy hearth, the storybooks, the window and the steam train resting patiently along the skirting board. Raider Biscuits warmed some milk and put pieces of Battenberg on a plate. The afternoon wore on and the light leaned toward evening, stretching itself thinner across the floor. Roscoe glanced once more at Sir Cedric before turning out the lamp. The patch caught the glow for a moment, then settled into shadow. All was snug. All was well. Night, night.